Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very unique honor for me, and the day started, perhaps most appropriately, in an unusual fashion. I was asleep, and I heard a steady pank, 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 pause. Pank, 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 pause. And this was repeated over a couple of minutes. Finally, I got up and made my way to the front window, and I looked out. And there was the local Boy Scout troop, driving metal stakes to set American flags for this Veterans Day. Another Veterans Day was with us. And I realized that I had probably seen the American flag displayed in every way that I could imagine as a reporter over 40 years in my career. I've seen it displayed in front of schools, in front of election booths, in front of courthouses. I've seen it marched at in front of parades. I've seen it raised above the still smoldering rubble of the World Trade Center. But I've never seen the flag more powerfully displayed than when it's laid as the last embrace upon a fallen soldier who awaits burial. Draping a casket as friends and family and a nation struggle to say goodbye to someone who has stepped forward to serve. And I recalled this morning the very first time I'd had the opportunity to bear witness to such an event. It was nearly 40 years ago. I was a young newspaper reporter, and I was attending a funeral in the East Side barrio of San Jose, California, for a soldier who had died in Vietnam. He was my age, and he was being laid to rest. He was the American-born son of parents who had immigrated from Mexico under the Bracero program of farm labor in the 1950s. Those of you with any familiarity know that farm laborers of that era faced horrid working and living conditions, and they lived a box-like existence that limited their lives due to nationality and ethnicity. Now, it was a different time back then, 40 years ago, and some in the community thought this funeral of this soldier was the perfect setting to protest the war. And some thought it was the perfect opportunity to attack racial and ethnic discrimination. The young man's father would have none of it. He came to me, grabbed me by a lapel, and said, "My son served as an American, period. My son died as an American, period." Those words have stayed with me over 4 decades. The spirit, the desire, the courage to don a nation's uniform in military service is a unique act of personal testimony. It speaks to all that we wish to believe is possible in this American experience. The bonds that bind one to the next in service, the belief in shared purpose, the determined conviction that what we do, not just what we say, but what we do will be the measure of who we are. Over these past 40 years, I've had numerous opportunities to revisit those values as I've considered the role of military service in our nation and our state's history. And one of the profound and often overlooked aspects of these centuries of service is the way discriminated people have stepped forward and served with courage, valor, integrity, and distinction in the face of horrific abuse. Let me share just a couple of examples. In the war with Mexico, 500 men are recruited from refugee camps in the upper Midwest to march into battle. They've been driven from their homes in Illinois in a wave of religious intolerance. They have been beaten. Their revered leader has been murdered before their very eyes. Their pleas to the government for intervention and protection ignored. Still, these 500 men stepped forward to serve the United States Army, in some important respects to prove loyalty, but in a very compelling sense to secure their own future as a distinct people. The story of the Mormon Battalion is now a cherished part of Western and national history. And it was just 20 years later that the first Americans of African descent were recruited to form the 54th Massachusetts Regiment during the Civil War, only to be informed that they would be paid less than white soldiers, their bodies having seemingly less worth in the eyes of their government. Their enlistment was the subject of editorials scorning their worth as soldiers, until they demonstrated uncommon bravery in battle. Almost 200,000 would join their ranks in the Union forces, and in the opinion of Abraham Lincoln, they were in fact the tipping point that allowed the war to preserve the nation. But they remained segregated. In the American West, they were known as the Buffalo Soldiers. Local newspapers were filled with misgivings of a distrustful public when the units were stationed in forts in the territories, including the Utah Territory. They were distrusted until their service and honor and dignity became their hallmark. But they are not the only segregated units in our military history. In World War II, thousands of young Japanese Americans enlisted to serve in so-called Nisei military units of the U.S. Army. Many of them enlisting as they and their families were held in harsh war relocation camps in the American interior because the nation doubted their loyalty based on their ethnicity.